our childhood is an important time and it shapes us. It affects the kind of relationships we experience as adults. Our childhood affects what our views are on the world, how we perceive other people, how we interact with them, and how we interact with ourselves. Children may have found themselves in a relationship where they are supporting their parents, for example. They are the ones who are parenting the parent. They're used to being the caregivers, they're used to being the one who's always there for other people. And when those children grow up and become adults in relationships, that might affect them. It might affect how comfortable they are to be vulnerable. It might affect how comfortable they are to be on the receiving end. It might affect their trust issues. Maybe they've never experienced ever being able to rely on someone, being able to trust someone. They might have experienced abandonment or felt isolated, and that can project into adulthood. They might fear their partner's going to leave them all the time. And the problem is, when you fear your partner's going to leave you all the time, that affects how you behave in that relationship, and it can go different ways. Somebody might start becoming very clingy to their partner. They might become very dependent on them. They might need constant reassurance that their partner is not going to leave them. So they might need text messages and phone calls all throughout the day, and that still might not tick the box if there's a big gap, or they still might get worried who's their partner talking to and what they're doing. And that can really be very draining for the other person. And the other ways the person can express their fear of abandonment is they might not really give themselves to that relationship. And by that I mean they might hold themselves back. They might have these boundaries around themselves where they're too worried about emotionally investing in this relationship. Because if the other person's going to leave anyway, what's the point in giving myself to this relationship if they're just going to leave me and they're just going to walk out? So we need to be mindful of our upbringing and our childhood and what we've experienced. And we've all experienced different things, and it can affect us in adulthood. And sometimes we think, oh, my partner's triggering me. They just keep saying things. They're annoying me. They're irritating me. They just keep on winding me up. There must be something really, there's a lot of negative vibes here. And what we don't realize is it's not necessarily them, but it's our own wounds from childhood that we're carrying around with us, and they haven't necessarily healed. They haven't been given that attention to heal, and the other person is just triggering them. But if we didn't have those wounds, we wouldn't be that triggered, and it can go both ways. So your partner's also entering this relationship with their own wounds, and you might be triggering them. And at a deeper level, we've got two people who really care about each other and really love each other and really want to make this marriage work and make this relationship work. But because of all these wounds and trigger points, there's so much instability going on in this relationship, so much frustration and maybe arguments, and they're not able to see how they could possibly be compatible. But if they were able to heal from these emotional wounds, if they were able to build trust and build that relationship based on stability, based on vulnerability, based on knowing each other are going to be there for each other, regardless of what they experience in their own childhoods, this relationship may well follow a different trajectory. We know that childhood trauma has been shown in studies to have a long-lasting impact on a person's emotional and psychological development. The ACE study followed up 17,000 children, and it showed a link between childhood adversity and physical and mental health as an adult. And there were many links shown from childhood. For example, chronic pain, heart disease, cancer, all of these were linked to childhood trauma. So we know that unresolved trauma can affect us mentally and physically. And whether we're aware of it or not, unresolved trauma can affect how we perceive love and security and trust and intimacy in our relationships. For example, if a child grew up in an environment where their emotional needs were ignored, they might develop a belief that they're not worthy of love or attention. They might feel that they're not good enough and deep down really fear that abandonment. That could mean They don't respond well to, well, criticism or feedback. If their partner's trying to say, oh, honey, could you just try doing it this way or that way? Or could you just, um, you know, for example, something about some chores at home or looking after the children in some way or managing finances, could they just try doing things differently? They might just respond to that in a way that is not really appropriate, or the spouse wasn't threatening them, they weren't being mean, they were being quite gentle in the way they're giving this feedback. But the person with those traumatic wounds can respond really, just take it as, that's it, I'm not good enough, and just find that they're not able to be on the receiving end of any type of feedback. And that makes relationships really difficult because the other person feels like they're just walking on eggshells and they can't say anything because it's going to trigger their partner. And it can be really difficult to build a healthy relationship when you're in an environment like that. People, you might find somebody is constantly seeking validation, or they're pushing people away and they're building barriers around themselves. And they may really not understand why they can't get close to their spouse and why they can't build that loving relationship that they want to, and why they're causing so much pain to somebody they really love. And if we look back to their childhoods, they might have experienced inconsistency and unpredictability. Maybe there was a lot of anxiety during their childhood. And because of that, they've grown up with that anxiety and they become, dependent on their spouse, and they need a lot of validation and reassurance, and they're constantly worried their partner is going to leave them. And these are often unconscious behaviors. We don't realize that we're behaving in this way until we reflect and take that time to really reflect on our behaviors, or we work with a professional who can help us understand and join the dots and work out why we're doing certain things. Sometimes we just respond with emotions. We get anxious, we get anxious, or we just move back from that person, or we just blame them. If only they weren't like this. If only, she's nagging me all the time. She's criticizing me all the time. And maybe she wasn't. Maybe she was being quite gentle in how she was saying things.